Okay, well, we're going to get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Healthy Building series. This time we have developing a flexible building operation plan. And we're going to be talking about what that is like for you to come back to work and opening up your building, and what things that you don't want to miss in all this fuss. So can you take the next page?
Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, yeah, you always got to get on the air hose.
Why won't we move?
So as participants know,
There we go.
Thank you. Participants, you may have been here before, so you know to use the chat box and the Q&A for questions later. And anybody who has sent questions in beforehand, we're going to make sure to ask those too. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jillian Gam. I'm the program manager for the U.S. Green Building Council of West Michigan. And today we have Eric DeVries from E3M Solutions. Eric and E3M Solutions have been a wonderful, very valued professional stakeholder from the USGBC and from the 2030 district. Eric is a great engineer who can articulate it in a way that anybody can understand. And you know, he also is an Iron Man, so there's a lot to learn from this guy. Thank you, Eric. So why don't you go to the next slide? So Eric, please take it away. Thank you so much for speaking.
Awesome. Well, I will say thank you to the USGBC for the opportunity to connect with everybody today. And yeah, we are going to talk about a building plan today, right? Focused around your building systems. There's a lot of discussion going on about, you know, the ASHRAE recommendations, CDC recommendations, liability, insurance, production. What's a little challenging is we're going to get into talking about kind of what a plan consists of and how to do that, not necessarily the actual physical plan for your building itself. And the reason for that is every building is going to be so different. From what type of building you are, to what risks and hazards you have in your building, to what type of systems you have in your building. So we're going to touch on a bunch of that later. Obviously, we want to talk about some good details today, but we also want to acknowledge that this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all plan for every building out there. So as we talk about that, right? Why are we talking about a plan? All these things keep popping in, right? We're hearing about flush valves and door openers to cleaning procedures, stagnant air turnover rates. It's a lot of technical information that can be challenging. You know, even as an engineer, we're getting a lot of information thrown at us, and it's creating questions. It's creating uncertainty of what do we do first? How do we prioritize what we do in our building, or where do we stop at some level? So it can be confusing, and that's really why we want to talk about a plan. What makes sense for your building? Where do you start that, and who do you engage as you do that? So to get started with that, we're going to talk about some common pitfalls that we're hearing from people, from clients, from buildings, from just conversations that we're having. The first one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Underreacting or overreacting. We've heard people that are like, I don't need to do anything in my building. And you're like, okay, let's acknowledge that that might be a bit of an underreaction. But let's also acknowledge that there can be overreaction as well. You know, let's not spend millions of dollars retrofitting systems in a building that at this point you're not bringing people back to. You know, if you're going to continue to work remotely, then the balancing of health and safety factors, liability, operations, it all changes. The next one, that balancing of factors, that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Indoor air quality, health and safety, it wasn't not on the radar, but it wasn't the number one thing on the radar 4 months ago. So now it's all of a sudden become everybody's first thing on their radar. So we want to talk about how to balance those different perspectives. System, getting back into some technical system design and capacity. The next one is probably one of the more common things we've seen lately is talking about tenant versus landlord responsibilities. Not knowing everybody that's on the call today, but it's safe to assume that there are people on the call that lease their building. That might be a triple net, that might be a modified gross lease, that might be in a gross lease. How does that affect what your plan is as you return to work? And a lot of people have started to return to work, so we're going to talk about that some today as well of, all right, we're back. How do we continue to evaluate where we're at? How do we put metrics or speed bumps in place that allow us to reevaluate where we're at? So that way it's not the set it and forget it approach. Well, I went in and I did a bunch of these things and now I'm good. This is going to continue to evolve, and that balancing of the health and safety with energy cost, liability, operational performance, that's a constantly managed and balanced equation. So we're going to come back to that, but kind of getting a couple of these pitfalls out there. So we're going to move into developing a building plan. Want to be very transparent and forthcoming here. We're going to talk a lot about the built environment, the building systems. Obviously, there are health and cleaning procedures. There are health screening procedures. There are a lot of these things that are still going to be relevant as you come to work, as you continue to work, as we move through the coming months. But we're going to focus today a little bit more on the building itself. So welcome questions on other parts, but focused a little bit on the building today. The first step in a successful building plan is building a team. Why do we say this? Why do we talk about this? Right there, HR to this point has handled a lot of a shift to work from home policy, a shift to maybe returning to work. What does that look like? To this point, HR has probably been a key leader in some of those things. But as we get back to building operation, we need to diversify that team. We need to incorporate maintenance. You know, what does maintenance need to be doing different? How does the plant manager, the operations supervisor, what is their input, right? Is something that is being driven by a kind of a health and safety policy affecting production? Or does production start to see something, okay, we've been doing this for 2 or 3 weeks now, or 2 or 3 months now, start to see something that says, hey, we could do this better, right? Let's not limit the input that the people engaging in the policies and procedures on a day-to-day basis that have to create that feedback loop. So that's the key, right? Building that diversified team from HR to operations to facility maintenance to purchasing. You know, where is purchasing involved? Is the masks that they're purchasing and providing to the employees uncomfortable? Are they hot? Are they causing any issues with other PPE required for the operation? So having a seat at the table for the right people on that team is really critical to bringing that building back online and continuing to operate it moving forward. So once you've built that team, where do you go? Right? We're starting to get into that discussion on a balance. How do you evaluate the balance of a financial responsibility, an environmental impact, health and safety? How do you balance those things? How do you look at, okay, we're an office building that is going to be working mostly remotely for the time being. Okay, your budget or your desired outcome for your space might be different than we're a live-in nursing home that has risks. We have a different clientele here. We have people here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how do these four things come together? How do you balance a risk from your building environment? How do you understand what a budget is? We've talked to people that have said, you know what, I'm going to set $5,000 aside, and we're like, great. It might not be enough based on your building type. We've had other people that have said there's almost no number that I can put in front of health and safety. And you're like, okay, you can be accurate with that, but you're well into seven figures for what you want to do. And you can see their faces stop and say, whoa, wait, what? So that's part of the balance, is understanding what budget do you have available now? What budget are you able and willing to spend moving forward? How can you phase that budget so you take steps now, but maybe recommendations change in 6 months? Have you invested in everything and now are stuck? Have you built that plan and said, okay, based on a cash flow perspective, we're able to take incremental steps? That kind of leads into that outcomes. Is the goal to eliminate, try to eliminate all virus transmission? Obviously, we want to control that. There's a risk there. There's an environmental health and safety concern there. But if the virus and the transmission of a virus, whether that be COVID-19 or something in the future, becomes the primary and only goal, we might sacrifice something else. And a great example of that is, right, ASHRAE right now is recommending that you increase outdoor ventilation air. You increase the amount of fresh air that you bring into a building. It's great. It's terrible for me. As a guy that struggles with pollen allergies, this time of year, as you open up fresh air in a building, I'm terrible. I am sneezing, I'm coughing, which has generated a question or two. Do you have COVID? The answer is no. But, right, I mean, you have to look at that as it becomes almost 90 degrees today, and you start increasing ventilation air, you have now introduced allergens into the space. You have introduced hot, potentially humid air that creates issues or can create issues with your HVAC system. So that's that balance of outcomes. Then what is your system? What does your building currently consist of? Are you furnaces? Are you a boiler and chiller system? Are you production different than offices? All of these system capabilities of how is it designed, what can it handle, what can you do with it? We toured a building for an office building here in Grand Rapids last week that wanted to start preparing for bringing some people back to work, and their system had fresh air introduced from a common system for the entire building. So we can't go in and change that without getting the landlord involved, because it impacts everybody else. And they're like, well, I'm sure the landlord will allow this. Well, you go another space in the system and they have a little bit of like a research lab going on. So you start changing ventilation air in a building, and now without good evaluation, now you're affecting the outcome and maybe the health and safety of what's going on in that research facility. Does it affect the outcome of your production? If you're a food production facility and you have to maintain certain temperatures and humidity for the safe production of food, if this isn't properly evaluated, you can open up some can of worms and create more issues than what you're trying to control. So evaluation is key. Once you've evaluated, right, now the understanding is talking time frame. And this is one of the hardest questions that might be involved in developing your building operation plan moving forward. A lot of Michigan, I know there are people on this call that are probably outside of Michigan, but in Michigan here, we've started to return to work. A lot of businesses have become open. So, the first step of what is a return to work like, we might have crossed that bridge. But what does it look like moving forward? What happens if, through the summer months, because of some of the healthy building webinars we've had before through the USGBC of temperature and humidity line up well, that maybe it helps control the virus over the summer. But what happens moving forward? What happens if there's a reflare of the virus? One of the things that we've had some discussions with people moving forward is, Fishbeck, the last presenter, actually that was a West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, they talked about that the office environment is going to shift from 10 to 15% remote employees to maybe to the neighborhood of 30 to 40% remote employees. So does the moving forward outcome and goals of your organization shift what you need to do in the short term? If the goal is to move to remote working, do we need to not change the HVAC system as much because we're going to now have less desks in the space due to remote workers, and we're able to do more than 6 feet? We're able to do 10 feet or 12 feet, or we've incorporated plexiglass shields and barriers between desks. I personally hope we don't fully go back to all private enclosed offices, but if we do, some of those things need to be thought through as you evaluate a time frame. Talking about future, right? One of the things that this pandemic has created a better understanding of, a better kind of foresight into the future would be, what does scalability in a workplace look like, right? We used to, as a mechanical engineer, we used to look at, this is how many how many people you expect in your building at one time. This is how many people are going to be in the office, or this is how many people are going to be in the gymnasium. And we designed for that. One of the outcomes and things to consider in a time frame of moving forward is, what does the future look like? How do you build scalability into the built environment? I'll try not to get too technical here, but I may for a minute, right? How do you incorporate variable speed drives, VFD drives, into ventilation equipment so you can hit a button on your building control system and increase the ventilation air for a day, right? How do you flush out a building, but then be able to get back to a more of a return to work environment where you're managing that outdoor air? There's a lot of questions there. How do you maybe take the step in a time frame before you invest in a bipolar ionization system for your entire building? Do you evaluate, well, maybe our break room and these 2 or 3 employees are our highest risk? Do you invest in a more portable system and do that in the meantime, right? I mean, to do some of these bigger scale retrofits, it takes time. It takes time to engineer them. It takes time to purchase the equipment and have them installed. So can you start in a place where you're able to go to a distributor, here in Michigan, there's several, you go to some of them and say, hey, I need 2 or 3 portable units that I can plug into the wall and I can use for the time being. That's a great way to get going and understand and get a better picture of where things are going. That's from a time frame perspective, this is one of the biggest challenges we face in the built environment. Is it seems like every day the CDC comes out with a new recommendation. There's labs in Europe versus labs in Asia that are coming out with still some unknown and not maybe fully proven results. So as you talk about time frame, how do you start biting off things, not knowing 100% where we're going? So as we talk about that, execute, right? We're going to keep this very, very simple. Don't let perfection stop progress. Don't let having to have fully redesigned a system, having talked with your landlord and put all of these procedures in place, stop you from making progress, right? I mean, early on, we got the ASHRAE recommendations. People moved on those. That's great. We got to continue to do that. We got to continue to do steps to get a plug-in unit for bipolar ionization that you can use while you wait for lead times or until you can re-engineer your system to make it work well. One of the challenges, one of the items I want to bring up around execute though, don't rush. Don't let perfection stop progress, but don't rush into major decisions either. And the reason I say that, right, is misapplying technology can actually hinder the outcome. Had a question come in about, can we put bipolar ionization in an air curtain so as carts are coming back into a grocery store or food is going out of a window for fast food? Hey, that's a great place. Like, we're trying to decontaminate as there's an exchange of equipment there. Well, most of the studies are showing, hey, it takes 5 to 10 minutes. I know the Spanish study that's getting done is about 10 minutes is really the key for bipolar ionization to be effective. Well, if an object is only passing through an air curtain, it's most likely not going to get the outcome that you're looking for. So that's the one caveat that we say with don't let perfection stop progress. Don't let haste generate waste. So something to keep in mind as you go into the execution phase. I'm sure there'll be some questions that come around this, and I'm excited to answer those as we continue on here. All right, getting through this, manage. Once you do something, right, and we're seeing this as Florida thought they had a good grasp on what was going on from a COVID perspective, and now temperatures and humidity and businesses opening back up have now changed that. The continuing to evolve, to reevaluate the balance between energy costs, space comfort, health, risks, how all of that comes together is what that team is going to need to do, right? We used to you have plant meetings, you have a meeting of production coming together saying, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to be doing differently as orders are going up and down in a manufacturing facility. Where we're at right now in the built environment, we really need to be doing that same thing ongoing from a building perspective. We need to have that team that we talked about, the team of legal, right? Liability, HR, plant operations, maintenance, your contractors, right? Continuing to manage. Manage doesn't just go with your building either. As an engineer who is engaged with contractors and you're under contract with a contractor to do a project, things have changed, right? Hey, you had this deadline, you needed to get this project done, or we expect this results by this date. We've got to manage expectations as part of a true team now. We've got to understand that it's not your HVAC contractor that's not trying to get a project done. It's an executive order that's requiring people to stay home. So managing existing relationships, managing expectations moving forward. You're starting to see clauses in contracts. I don't think it'll be long before AIA has some contract clause as well that neither party is held liable if an executive order shuts something down. So that's that manage the building, manage the risks, manage ongoing expectations of having to tell somebody, hey, we might have to shut a building down for a day to be able to do some sanitation, but that might be better than having to shut it down for 14 days to try to get through an outbreak. So Don't set it and forget it. All right, before we get into questions, and I'm gonna get done a little quick today. I talked a little faster than I was intending to, but that's okay. We wanna touch on really kind of a couple key takeaways, right? There's a lot of unknowns still. There's a lot of trying to understand your building, your operation. A couple key takeaways. One, find that balance. Virus management isn't the only thing that's important. We've got to continue to balance some level of sustainability. We've got to balance production safety, right? I mean, you can't sacrifice doing what you do if you have the ability to do that. Obviously, health and safety has to be very, very important. But there's got to be a balance, and not saying don't do healthy and safe things, but can you not change your humidity as much as maybe an office space could because of other requirements? Find that balance. Develop a plan. Write that plan down. Right? You don't start a business. Most people don't start a business without developing a business plan. Our business plan was built 6 years ago. I can tell you that business plan has evolved, but having it in writing, having something down that says, this is how we intend to operate the building. Here are, if we have people get sick, what do we do? Does this plan change as new information comes out? Having that plan and being flexible with that plan. I'm talking about reevaluating and managing, right? I'm pretty sure I saw a statement the other day on a news article that the United States has about 6 million doses of hydrochloroquine sitting out there now because everybody thought that was going to work. It doesn't. It's not working the way they thought it was going to. Now, a guy like me that takes that for my lupus, I appreciate that I have access to my prescription again, but how do you have that written down, and how do you have a plan that says we're not going to invest millions of dollars in millions of doses of something, or millions of dollars in a building system that isn't fully proven? I believe, UV, bipolar ionization, fresh air, these things are all good, but we don't have definitive third-party testing proof right now. All of this is evolving so quickly. There are case studies out there by manufacturers. There are white papers, but some of the third-party independent testing, that data hasn't been published yet. Some of that is starting to come out, but that might shift that written plan. That might shift how to reevaluate and manage that building. Big thing as well is engage that team, bring together a diverse perspective of a building plan, creating effective solutions that are continually being reevaluated. If we as a society, if we feel like we have arrived and we have this 100% under control, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. And that's going to happen in your building as well. So the more we can engage a team, find the balance, have that plan, and continue to reevaluate it, the better. With that, I saw several questions pop in. I think Jillian will go through those. But yeah, that was talking about kind of the higher level ideas of developing a plan. We stayed away from a bit of the specifics today because that's going to be very driven by your facility, by your goals, by your desired outcome, some of those types of things. But having that framework of a plan is going to allow you to operate your building the best way possible.
Thank you so much, Eric, for this great information. Yes, we have been having questions come through. There seems to be a couple of categories. Some are like operational oriented and some are relationship oriented. So I'm going to try to, which do you want? You want operations or relationship first?
Let's start with the relationship.
Okay, great. Well, one we have is, where was it? I wrote it down. How frequently do you encourage somebody to revisit the plan, your plan?
I would say that is going to evolve as well. I would say early on here, I would probably revisit a plan, every 3 to 4 weeks. If you're in an area or in a high risk facility, if you're in a senior living care facility, or even like an outpatient medical facility that isn't full on hospital, I might reevaluate that on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis as more information is coming out, right? Because that information continues to evolve. But from there, I would say a good starting point for the next 2, 3, 4 months might be look at that plan monthly to say, okay, has what we intended to execute, has that gone in? Have we seen positive results from that? Is there new data out there? Is there a new idea? Is someone from our leadership team? Is someone from the production team? Is a contractor or an engineer that you've got involved in that team saying, hey, we're seeing tremendous success with this? I think monthly would be a good place for a lot of people to start from that perspective.
Would you encourage people to keep KPIs in that monthly plan too?
Yes. Yep. Obviously, it's really hard to manage something you don't measure. So trying to establish what that KPI is could be one of the bigger challenges out there, though.
Oh, a question we just got in. A KPI is a key performance indicator for the audience who just asked that. Do you find that there's any unorthodox KPI, key performance indicators that have kind of come up as of recently?
That's a good question, and I'd want to get back to you on that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but right, because sick rates, illness rates, lost work days, all of that is very dynamic right now for a lot of different reasons. So that's where that KPI can be a little challenging. But I'm trying to think. I don't have anything off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, and honestly, me neither. I was just, wondering what, somebody in the field would say. So there seemed to be an interest when you spoke about the contractor perspective, the contract on building owner perspective.
Yep.
So which one to do first? Well, let's start with the one that folks, as you know, I think I've said this one before. So you have the opportunity to send questions in ahead of time to make sure that the presenter is informed with the curiosities in the audience. So one of the questions that came in previously was, and I think you did touch on this before, but when considering arrangements, what compromising arrangements regarding pay and liability have you seen lately between owners and contractors when work has been suspended due to no fault of either party?
Yeah, that is a really good and really difficult question. Right? I mean, none of us in March understood that in Michigan we would be staying home for a period of time due to this. So contracts existed, agreements existed. I'd love to have a concrete example of how it's gone really well. The best thing I can say is, right, be a team. Mm-hmm. Come to the table with each other and understand and negotiate that this isn't either party's fault, right? Coming in guns a-blazing is not going to work very well from that perspective. So it takes compromise. It takes understanding from the contractors, the engineers. It takes understanding from the owners. I wish I had a great answer to that question, mm-hmm. but I don't.
And then I guess that leads to the next question, and I hope it's not a gotcha. You were talking about, this question came in around the time you were talking about clauses in contracts. What would be over or underreacting, including clauses about this in the contract? I mean, that's paraphrased, but that's essentially what the question was.
And I'm gonna try to answer that the best I can, paraphrased as well, right? I mean, there have been clauses in contracts, right? If liquidated damages, right? So if you're not done by this date, you're going to start incurring $500 a day in liquidated damages, right? And that's where those contract clauses, people, I think they're still going to exist. There's still going to be a need to generate results, but there's going to, some attorney that's not an engineer is going to come up with a clause that's going to go with that. That's going to say, right, if there are things that are, all right, the term in a lot of contracts is act of God, right? That allow certain, that's natural disasters that, right? If suddenly an earthquake hit Southern California, that's not the contractor's fault. That's not the building owner's fault. There's going to be something that's going to come out of this that's going to be generated around executive orders, stay home orders, those types of things. I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's where you're going to see that, right? Liquidated damages or in payment terms, right? If somebody had a prearranged, hey, we're going to do a monthly draw and this is what it's going to look like, that might change, right? How does that get stretched out due to a stay-at-home order? I would love to have more understanding of this. I would love to have more answers on that. But that's definitely going to be attorneys.
Yeah, it seems like there's both the security piece from the legal perspective and the compromise teamwork. Let's just get through this together of the actual on the ground. And
because I think about that too, right? I mean, a contractor might start on something, and even then it might be, hey, we had somebody test positive, right? It's not that they're trying to pull off the job and not do the job, but they might be saying, we're going to scale back a crew. So that's something that we're seeing already in the construction world, is that crew sizes kind of ebb and flow based on, hey, this guy may have been exposed, so we're gonna shrink our crew down a little bit. So the tight knit construction schedules are a little harder to hit right now. It's got to be a little bit more dynamic of, we're able to scale up or scale down based on sickness, health, availability of product. There's become some long lead times on certain things just due to the fact that, you go upstream several levels and all of a sudden manufacturing was shut down for 3 weeks in another state. That's affecting construction in Grand Rapids. So there's got to be an understanding and a teamwork around the construction schedule as well.
Yeah, there's a whole ecosystem that's being supported from one project in particular.
Yep.
Which segues well to the scalable question, but I want to connect with Jason first, because Jason popped a question as we were talking. And he said, is there a third-party certification for the built environment? For the built environment may recommend to assist with post-COVID back to office? We're aware of ISSA and GBAC. Any others?
Those are the two I'm aware of. I'm trying to think if ASHRAE has a certification around their 62.1. But one's not coming to my head. I'd love to follow up with Jason and have that discussion where they be able to do a little bit of research on that. I'd be happy to support him on that.
For sure. So Jason, if you want to grab Eric's contact information later, feel free to reach out, or send something back in the chat for a further discussion. And this can go with anybody on the call also. So a question about scalability, which I thought was really interesting. What are the top 1 or 3 things I should focus my attention on to make sure my systems are scalable? Scalable up and down in case we have another rendezvous.
Yep. Scalability. It's going to become significantly part of the design process. Engineers thinking of outdoor air, ventilation air, right? There's a formula. You take X amount of CFM per square foot, X amount of CFM per person. That defines your ventilation air required by code, and you pick the next size. What's going to come out of this is a potential for people to grossly oversize those, which can cause an energy and a cost implication. But right, you might say, hey, I'm going to design for 20% more. I'm going to design for a little bit more, and I'm going to utilize variable speed drives to actually optimize the system to where it needs to be at that time. So from a scalability perspective, variable frequency drives are required on a lot of things per code now, but I think they're going to become even more common, right? The ability to slightly oversize something and then back it down to exactly where you want it, I think is going to become something that is very much in designs and going to be very hot in the next several months to year. I think another thing that is going to come out of this too, retro commissioners are going to love to hear this, but I think an understanding from a scalability perspective is there's a lack of understanding of where you are now, right? You have HVAC systems, you have, filter systems. Well, okay, well, what is my system capable of? So that's where you're going to see some of that scalability come into place. Is people are going to evaluate where they are now so they can have a plan moving forward. But then as they move forward, you're gonna see variable speed drives on a lot of things. And that's my opinion. Starting to see that from some manufacturers as well of, right, you can over design the fan a little bit and slow it down with a variable speed. So if you need to add higher MERV rated filters, you can overcome some static. You can do those types of things. Scalability is going to come in unit design, and scalability is also going to come in system design. How your ductwork is run, how your building is set up, what types of systems, right? Our heat pumps, a heat pump system that's very common in an office place sometimes has a hard time incorporating larger amount of ventilation air if you're just doing it at the heat pumps. So is a dedicated outdoor air system now going to be designed in to provide that ventilation air, and that becomes scalable? That's where we're going to start seeing some of this come into play over the next coming months and years.
And when you keep talking about VFDs, that they're good for your wallet as well as for the benefit of your equipment too.
Yep.
Just a little note also, VFDs are, great for the electric grid as well. So the utilities are there to give you incentives to purchase VFDs to keep them affordable for you as well.
Yeah, I don't know if they're on the call, but Consumers Energy, DTE Energy, your local utility, they will give you incentives for that, because if you design a system and you engineer it that it takes 5 horsepower or a little over 5 horsepower, the next size up is a 7.5 horsepower. Well, that's actually 25-30% over designed, overpowered for what you need it to do, but it's the next available size. So that's where those variable speed drives give you the ability to dial it into what you actually need. And that gives you the ability from a scalable perspective to say, I want to throw a bunch of fresh air into this building, or I want to push a higher static through these filters, and be able to account for those things.
Where do you think that retro commissioning has its place in these conversations?
I think it's part of the evaluation process.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you're not able to go to 100% outside air because of something in your facility, or, I mean, there's a large energy cost to that, right? I mean, if you're in Miami, Florida, and it's hot and humid, going to 100% outside air isn't potentially feasible. So retro commissioning, understanding, okay, we were designed to have X amount of fresh air, but we actually only have 60% of that coming in. That's where you can start to use that retro commissioning. Another place for retro commissioning is you're looking at, private offices, conference rooms, right? And we're worried about stagnant air. We're talking about air turnover rates, right? Engineer can write it on a plan, and you can have 500 CFM going into that conference room. But if it wasn't actually set up that way, and you're only getting 100 CFM of fresh air into that conference room, you still have a problem where you're trying to congregate people.
Yeah.
So that's where retrocommissioning is going to come in. It's going to be evaluating system capabilities and also evaluating where you're at now, right? If you need to bring people into a room for a reason for your facility, and it was designed to have X amount of air, but finding out you don't actually provide it that amount of air is going to be really critical. And that's where some of that retrocommissioning is going to come in.
For sure. And actually then bridging, we were talking about, you know, how to handle your energy and retrocommissioning. There's a question that came in about energy rates. And if anybody can answer a question about energy rates, it's you, Eric. So with production schedules changing, is there anything advantageous I can do regarding my energy rate? I've heard pros and cons about, how do you say this, ratchet policy?
Ratchet rates. So what the question is consumers DTE, a lot of utilities have come out with, the official term is a time of use rate.
Time of use.
Right? So it's going to be it's close to 90 today, right?
Right.
The electric grid is going to be in the most stress, the most demand between 11 a.m. this morning and 6 p.m. tonight, right? And that's the on-peak hours as defined by most utilities. So what a time of use rate or a ratchet rate often incorporates is they're going to charge you a bit more for your energy when every house is calling for air conditioning to run, when every commercial office is trying, those of us that are open, are trying to run right now. It's the highest demand on the electric grid. So as a production facility or even a non-production facility, we're seeing time of use rates be very effective for non-traditional buildings, but from in the morning, in the evening, they're going to charge you less for that energy. That can be very advantageous to look at right now. One of the challenges is, where do you go, right? Because if you evaluate that on your historical data, it might not be terribly accurate, because if your production has changed now, it can be challenging. So one of the recommendations that we would have for people is, if you're kind of settling into a little bit of a new normal, right? If you've been up and running for a couple weeks, you would request that data. Consumers DTE, Holland BPW, Duke Energy out of state, your utilities will for the most part have that data available to you. You can request that interval data and you can start to look at how that works. The caveat with that, and the statement I will make, is you can only, with most utilities, only change that rate once a year. So if you change it now based on a reduced production rate, saying this is going to save me money for the next 3 months, it likely will, but it also could change, right? If you get back to full production, or the economy picks right back up where it was, these types of things, and you get back to a full production level. So that's the one thing to think about, is how long are you going to be at the reduced production rate? If the only way you're saving dollars is at that reduced production, and you don't see that continuing, you might want to reevaluate a little bit more. But in terms of looking at that, you'd collect that interval data from the utility. Your account rep from the utility can help you with that. Private parties like us or others do that as well. Look at that data and start to develop a plan for how does that look. As one other piece with that is, as part of the recommendations from ASHRAE and the CDC, is staggering shifts as possible.
Right.
Right. What used to be a 8 to 5 production facility running one shift might now, for the foreseeable future, be more of a 2-shift operation running part load for both shifts. That could be a great time to incorporate time of use rates.
Do you find that some businesses have moved their shifts, their most energy intensive, to when energy is cheapest for them, depending on what rate they're on?
It's a great strategy, right? If you are a 24/7 production facility, but you have certain machines that don't run all day, that don't need to run all day, taking those higher energy users and running them at night is a great example. Going back several years, many years in my career now, more than a decade, I worked for a conveyor and automation company. I had several large laser cutters that would cut steel. They used to run them all day. Then we helped them understand that by programming them in the afternoon and running them at night, it was saving tens of thousands of dollars in the year, and nothing actually changed with how they ran production. So there is, it is advantageous to try to run high energy users that don't have to run full time, running those in an off shift.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder how frequently somebody thinks about that as from an operation manager perspective.
Yeah, that's what, I think there was a question, or I heard a question as we were building this too, talking about demand, right? Talking about energy demand, right? Shifts are changing, people are coming back to work, what's coming online when, even being strategic about when you turn stuff on.
Yeah.
Right? If peak hours are from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. with a lot of utilities, if you can not turn that extra compressor on right after lunch, if you can turn that on and have it ramp up at 10 a.m., the amount that you pay for that energy changes, but also how you're setting that peak charge. High lows are another example. I presented at, it was a West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum event back in, I want to say in January. And we talked about cold storage, right? You run cold storage really cold in the morning from 8 to 10 a.m. in the morning. You run it colder, and then you let it drift a little bit through the day. And there's strategies, there's controls, there's USDA regulations to some of that, but understanding all that, there are large dollar amounts that can be saved by just when you use your energy. You're not even changing how much energy you use, you're just changing when you use it.
And the way we're talking right now, we talk with people who are great with process management, of managing the flow of their whole building. But when we're speaking of this kind of flow, it's also, you need to know like a deep understanding of your equipment and the energy ratings of your equipment. And sometimes, that's like learning another skill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging.
There's a reason energy managers have full-time jobs. So
that's very true. So there was a question that had come through. It was a little ballparky, but maybe you can shed some insight on it. It's about it kind of balance. It's about remote working and keeping the I'm trying to find it, excuse me, and keeping the productivity up. So have you seen any software/cloud trends for businesses which find the balance between confidentiality, remote flexibility, and cost savings?
You led with the tough one to end.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. So cloud software around confidentiality, remote flexibility, and cost savings.
Yeah.
I
appreciated the question. It was a hard one to think about.
So I don't know if I have a specific answer to that question, but I'll try to give an example of a cloud software that has supported our team.
Sure.
Right. We do 3D design in a program called Revit. A lot of people on this call will be familiar with that. You're doing a 3D model of a building, right? The historical model would be that resides on your server. You've got sync times. Well, you go to work remotely, you go to work flexible, and now you're dependent on your VPN, your virtual private network, your access into your own network. So we transitioned our team onto a program called BIM 360, which allows us to take that model and put it up in a cloud, and now everybody can access that cloud. It worked very well for us. We found that our engineers were getting about a half hour more a day of productivity right now by having that software in place. You multiply that across a 15-person team, that's a lot of time in a day. I don't know exactly, that question's pretty open-ended. So there are definitely tools out there for being able to better incorporate a team, to be able to better remotely access data. As a production engineer sitting at their computer in the plant all the time anymore. No. So there's steps, there's things that might need to occur to be able to access that data differently. Hopefully, so the short answer might be yes. The long answer is not knowing. Maybe great context to that question. Whoever asked that, I'd love to have a discussion with you about what you're looking for, because there's absolutely tools out there, from production to plant management to design and engineering to the full gamut, to be able to be more productive in a flexible environment. One of the an example that we're seeing already just in designing for flexibility are incorporating webcams and speakers into conference rooms now. People never, right? They're like, oh, I have a TV on the wall, I have a projector. Now, well, for only a little bit of additional cost, almost every conference room we're designing, they're saying, well, can I get some speakers and a microphone and a webcam built in, and thinking some of those things ahead. So that even down to that small level of, you're re-engineering an office space to make it better, but adding in $500 in technology to your conference room ahead of time makes it set up and more equipped to do flexible and remote calls such as this.
And that just goes to what you were saying earlier about how to prepare yourself with the balance and the resiliency moving through what act of God, is what was said.
That's a contract term. I don't like that term, but it's a contract term.
Well, it's a new one for me. So if I've learned anything, I learned how to talk about that in contracts. But I think it plays well to what you had said with your best practices of be receptive to this sort of technology engagement, to keep us flexible for moving forward.
Yep.
Would you mind going to the next slide?
Somehow.
So,
yep.
There we are. So do take down his. Sorry, go ahead. Did you want to say something, Eric?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, folks, take down this information if you'd like to contact Eric about further questions that U3M Solutions does. And I'm sure that all of you know my email by now, though it's jillian@usgbc-wm.org. Well, we thank you so much, Eric, for always and forever. Thank you for always being one of our experts to talk with our attendees. So next coming up is an interesting one. It's through a connection that we have with the University of Purdue. They're pursuing research on Legionella and other diseases that are formed in water that is held stagnant during this pandemic. So you might see a survey coming out pretty soon, not only for how we did well on this webinar that you just spoke to, though as well the surveys coming up is about what you currently know about water safety in your building. They're trying to get a baseline understanding for what people in our area know lies in their water inside their stagnant pipes. So the University of Purdue will be speaking with us in this coming Healthy Building webinar series. So please tune into that. And do fill out the survey that's going to come to you soon. As you all know by now, or maybe if you don't, visit our website for a recording of this webinar. And further questions can be directed to me or Eric. We're always here to help you. As always, thank you very much to our ongoing sponsors who continue to help with all the programs that USGBC-WM does, including Consumers, DTE, Eagle, and Wiggy Foundation. Thank you everybody for coming on the call, and we're looking forward to having you next week. Take care, everybody. Thank you again, Eric.
Thank you, Jillian.